That's my best friend. That's my best friend.
Peace and assalamu alaikum, family. This is your brother Malcolm Flex TV, and your brother is doing another video. And this is a topic that Sister Vicky X Dillard also touched on, and I also wanted to touch on the same topic as well, because I find it very informative for the black community. Very informative. So this video is talking about black identity extremists and how it parallels and correlates with the counterintelligence program. So as you can see, I have an article up from The Intercept, and the name of the article is called "The FBI Spends a Lot of Time Spying on Black Americans." Controversial topic. So I just want to read through this article and give my thoughts and give my reviews on such an important topic. Okay? So let's begin. Okay, it begins this is by Alice Sperry, white woman. Okay, she made this October 29th, 2019. The FBI has come under intense criticism after a 2017 leak exposed that its counterterrorism division had invented a new, unfounded domestic terrorism category it called Black Identity Extremism, right? And the fundamental part that I want to highlight is the fact that this was a leak. Somebody leaked this information. Okay, somebody exposed this information that the counterterrorism division had invented a new and unfounded domestic terrorism category that is called Black Identity Extremism. Right? Okay. That's important, because they didn't want the people to know this, right? Since then, legislators have pressured the Bureau's leadership to be more transparent about its investigation of black activists. And a number of civil rights groups have filed public records requests to try to better understand who exactly the FBI is investigating under that designation, right? And there were many black activists during the time of Trayvon Martin, during the time with the whole Mike Brown and Ferguson situation, during the time of the Freddie Gray situation with the riots in Baltimore and Missouri. You know, a few activists who were in Missouri were found dead in certain instances, you know, and it is believed that these were assassinations on black activists, right? Let me continue. Although the Bureau has released hundreds of pages of documents, it continues to shield the vast majority of these records from public scrutiny, right? They hiding information. The sheer volume of documents those surveillance efforts have produced is troublesome. Advocates say the latest batch of FBI documents obtained by the American Civil Liberties Union and the racial justice group Media Justice and shared with The Intercept reveals that between 2015 and 2018, I wonder what was going on between these years, because in 2015 was the 20th year anniversary of the Million Man March, or the Holy Day of Atonement, that was led by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and the Nation of Islam. Okay, so they had created this division, this counterterrorism division, under the name Black Identity Extremists around 2015, right? The FBI dedicated considerable time and resources to opening a series of assessments into the activities of individuals and groups it mostly labeled Black separatist extremists, right? What do they mean by Black separatist extremists? They are talking about people who, or black people who want to be separated from white America, right? And I can probably name a few groups, at the top of my head who have this ideology, and best believe the Nation of Islam is one of them. So this is how they categorize this, right? Black separatist extremists, right? This designation was eventually folded into the category of Black identity extremism. So now they folded into a new category called Black identity extremism. These black separatists, right? Well, what is Black identity? When you got groups like, Black Lives Matter, you got groups like the Nation of Islam, where we teach the knowledge of self, where we want our people to know who they are. Hebrew Israelites, Black Panthers, and so forth and so forth. These are the type of groups that the establishment is keeping a close eye on, right? Let me continue. This designation was eventually folded into the category of the Black identity extremism. Earlier this year, following an onslaught of criticism from elected officials, civil liberties advocates, and even some law enforcement groups, the FBI claimed that it had abandoned the Black identity extremism label, substituting it for a racially motivated violent extremism. They said they substituted that name for racially motivated violent extremism, right? So what they try to do is, instead of narrowing it down to just black people, right, specifically, they try to broaden the narrative and make it apply to not just only black people by saying, right here, racially motivated extremism, right? Instead of just Black identity extremism to kind of cover it up. Look at the wicked games they're trying to play just using words and language. Critics say that this designation conveniently obscures the fact that black supremacist violence, unlike white supremacist violence, does not actually exist. Right? Because it's not black people going around shooting up public places and doing mass shootings. It's not black people that's shooting up schools, malls, movie theaters, churches, and restaurants. It's not black people doing this, right? Who has a black identity? Come on. Although the FBI has frequently changed its labels and terminology, the surveillance of black Americans has continued. As The Intercept has reported, following the killing of Mike Brown by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, the FBI began spying on Ferguson activists and tracking their movements across states, warning local law enforcement partners that Islamic State group supporters were urging protesters to join their ranks, right? So they're using Islamic State supporters as an excuse to follow these black activists, more specifically the ones who were in Ferguson, right? Again, a few of them who were out on the forefront were killed, were murdered. Okay, so they're not just tracking and following these individuals. I personally believe that they are killing these individuals. Because when you got these fresh new faces rising up, speaking out in their voices for thousands of people, they are taking plays out of the old playbook like they did back in the 50s, 60s, even 70s. You know, it's the same game, right? So the FBI also drafted a mysterious race paper, the contents of which remain secret even though the Bureau has disowned it. And as the Young Turks reported, the Bureau has established a program dubbed Iron Fist, targeting so-called black identity extremists with undercover agents. It's called Iron Fist, targeting so-called black identity extremists with undercover agents. What are they doing? They are planting undercover agents around who they deem black identity extremists, but these are none other than our black activists, our freedom fighters, right? And they're tracking them. They're even inserting these agents into some of our groups, and they are penetrating our circles. And we think that we have a brother or a sister right next to us in arms. I'm not talking about weapons. I'm talking about in lockstep with one another in ranks. And these people are penetrating our circles. So we have to be able to purge and vet our circles and know when a brother is a brother and a sister is a sister. We know who we are dealing with. See, because during the counterintelligence program, there were agents that were among some of our most famous leaders, such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and when you read the FBI files, they had a lot of the messengers' intimate conversations recorded, word for word. Brother Malcolm X, and he had a bodyguard that was an FBI agent by the name of Gene Roberts. Okay, so that goes to show you how close they can get among us. He had a bodyguard that was an FBI agent by the name of Gene Roberts. And many other of our great leaders and activists had agents and informants in their circles, right? Okay, the latest documents were turned over to the ACLU and media justice after the group sued the FBI last March over its failure to comply with a public records request. While the Bureau is expected to release more documents in the coming months, what it has turned over so far is so heavily redacted that it is largely incomprehensible, right? So what they mean by redacted is when you go and you look at these files, these FBI files, and you see these large black lines covering up the words, right? That's what it means that's what a redaction is. That's what it means to be redacted, right? So normally when you read these FBI files, in the files they tell you who the people that are involved with them are, who these agents are. They tell you who these informants are. They tell you the places, you know what I'm saying, that they have been, the conversations that they have had, So when the FBI redact all this information out, it makes it so obscure to the point where, that these individuals can still be among us and we wouldn't even know it because they are blacking everything out. All the most important information that we need so we know how this enemy is operating, they are blacking it out. They are redacting it, right? That's important. In addition to removing entire paragraphs and all geographical and other identifiers from the documents, right, just like I said, the FBI simply withheld hundreds of pages in full, These documents suggest that since at least 2016, the FBI was engaged in a national intelligence collection effort to manufacture a so-called black identity extremist threat. They was trying to create, right? Because that's what it mean by the FBI was engaged in a national intelligence collection in effort to manufacture. They was trying to create a so-called black identity extremist threat. They was trying to create a false flag narrative. Listen to what I'm saying. They try to create a false flag narrative. That's what it means by to manufacture. They was trying to create a narrative, right? For what? To have a reason and a purpose to be following, tracking, and even killing some of these black activists. Listen to what I'm saying as I continue, right? These documents suggest that since at least 2016, the FBI was engaged in a national intelligence collection effort to manufacture so-called black identity extremist threat. Nusrat Chowdhury, Deputy Director of the ACLU Racial Justice Program, told The Intercept, "They are spending a lot of energy on this, and they are clearly reaching out to other law enforcement," right? Just during the time of COINTELPRO, back in the 50s, 60s, even before then, ever since J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI, this devil, right? They was working with local law enforcement. It was the FBI, local law enforcement, CIA, and BOSS. All these groups were in cahoots with one another during the assassination of our brother Malcolm X. And it's in my personal opinion that I think Thomas Hagen and the guys who did this assassination together were also in cahoots with the CIA, but I personally believe that they did it with them and kept it a secret. But one thing that Thomas Hagen did say, that they never received orders or instructions, or it was never even put in their minds. It was never even put in their mind by the Nation of Islam to kill Malcolm X, according to the actual trigger man, Thomas Hagen. But I think he's protecting somebody. In my opinion, I believe he's protecting the CIA. Because when you understand how the CIA operates, when they do hits and stuff like that, they don't put anything on paper. Everything is verbal. They make verbal contracts and stuff like that. Everything, they don't put nothing on paper, so they can so nobody can trace it. Right? Nobody will have the receipts to prove that they did it because they don't put it down on paper. Giving y'all the game. right? But let me continue. They are spending a lot of energy on this, and they are clearly reaching out to the other law enforcement. We are troubled about the fact that so much information is not being made available to the public, she added. We just know that the government is likely redacting information that should be disclosed to the public. It frequently does. A Bureau spokesperson wrote that The Intercept in the statement that every activity that the FBI conducts must uphold the Constitution and be carried out in accordance with federal laws. But if that would be the case, then they wouldn't have to redact some of those documents. Many of those documents they wouldn't have to redact if what they was doing was in conduct in which it upheld the Constitution and the federal laws. Right? Because when you are clean, you have nothing to hide. Right? Okay. Investigative activity may not be based solely on the exercise of rights guaranteed by the First Amendment, the spokesperson added. The FBI's investigative methods are subject to multiple layers of oversight, and we ensure that our personnel are trained on privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. Baseless assessments. Most of the newly released documents are investigative files that show the FBI has opened a number of what Bureau guidelines refer to as assessments, primarily into the activities of individuals it calls black separatist extremists. Assessments differ from full-blown investigations or predicated investigations in the Bureau's lingo, because they do not need to be predicated on a factual basis. That means the Bureau needs no evidence of criminality or a national security threat in order to open an assessment. Assessment need only to be authorized by a specific purpose, such as recruiting new informants. And when you read the counterintelligence program files, you will see a lot of these assessments being opened up. Like I said, it didn't need a major reason to open up an assessment, because they just going on assumptions, they're going on suspicion of what an individual might be doing, and they're doing assessments, they're gathering information. Right? They don't have to prove anything with hard facts. They just need to gather the information. Then they begin the investigation. Right? Then they get ready to move on you. Like it says at the bottom, assessments need only to be authorized for a specific purpose, such as recruiting new informants. See? The FBI will approach you and try to get you to work on their behalf. See, this stuff is real, man. This stuff ain't playing. This stuff, you can't play with this stuff. Let me continue. As a new report by the Civil Liberties Group Defending Rights and Dissent notes, when choosing targets for an assessment, agents are allowed to use ethnicity, religion, or speech, protected by the First Amendment as a factor, as long as it is not the only one. Right? So they can come at you in the straight path. They can come at you in the church, in the mosque, in wherever you are. They could come at you looking like you. But you got to be careful. As the report notes, even though the standards for opening an assessment are extraordinarily low, the FBI is allowed to use extremely intrusive investigative techniques in performing them, including physical surveillance, use of informants, and pretextual interviews. Listen to the methods that the enemy is allowed to use. Right? He's able to do physical surveillance, use of informants, and pretextual interviews. So you got to be careful, man, how you move and who you got in your circle. During these pretextual interviews, FBI agents are not required to disclose their status as federal officials. That means they're undercover. And can lie about the purpose of the interview in order to elicit incriminating statements. Agents can open an assessment without a supervisor's approval for a period of 30 days, after which a supervisor must sign off on an extension. After 90 days, an assessment must be reauthorized. Assessments can be reauthorized an unlimited number of times, which means that the FBI can surveil law-abiding citizens posing no national security threats for years. They just going off suspicion. They just going off of suspicion. Right? They don't even have to have nothing on you that's solid. But just because they feel that you might be a threat, they have permission to track you. Okay? And right here is a document, a copy of one of those documents. When you go into FBI files, you will see plenty of them. Okay. Many of the new documents obtained by the ACLU and the media justice suggest that the FBI repeatedly reauthorized assessments beyond their initial duration periods. Because of the heavy redactions, however, it is not clear whether the Bureau has opened many different assessments or whether the same handful of assessments have been extended multiple times. While some of the assessments refer to a particular geographic area of responsibility, others do not include such a designation, suggesting that they may refer to nationwide assessments of certain groups or organizations. The reauthorization requests released by the FBI include a series of questions about the objective of the assessment, whether it was fulfilled and any investigative techniques deployed. Because the answers are fully redacted, however, it's impossible to tell whether the assessments had plausible justifications. And when you go and actually read the counterintelligence program files, you will actually see a lot of this stuff for yourself, right? It's also unclear whether any robust review led to each reauthorization or whether supervisors merely rubber stamp extension requests. Basically saying that they ain't even really look at why they asked for an extension. They just did it just because. Unfortunately, they're just redacting the parts of these that will give us an objective check on how they're making decisions, right? Because the Bureau doesn't want to be questioned. Working with the police. In addition to paperwork relating to its multiple assessments, the new documents include reports of liaisons with organizations outside of the FBI and electronic communications suggesting active FBI collaboration with other law enforcement agencies. The Bureau's memos refer to a number of strategy meetings involving local law enforcement, including in the days before the first anniversary of Brown's killing in Ferguson. Right? So they were meeting days prior before the anniversary of Brown's killing in Ferguson, right? Where it says, in which it reignited reignited protests. Right? The anniversary of his killing reignited protests, and they was meeting and preparing for it before it even took place. In another exchange, law enforcement partners were asked to contribute to collecting better intelligence on possible black separatist extremists. Right? So they asking local law enforcement to keep tabs on who they deem to be black separatists or black identity extremists. So when you wonder why you getting pulled over constantly harassed by local law enforcement, maybe because they're following you, they're tracking you. They were instructed to do what they're doing. They showed up to Sister Tatiana's house because she had possibly been a target of local law enforcement days after the Amber Geiger case. The documents also refer to the FBI's work with Joint Terrorism Task Forces, which bring together agents with officers from hundreds of states, local and federal law enforcement agencies, because JTTFs are run by the FBI. They operate under FBI guidelines, which provide fewer protections for speech, privacy, and civil liberties than the rules governing local police and other law enforcement. But while federal and other law enforcement cooperation is routine in involving local police in vague and sweeping political surveillance efforts is deeply problematic, critics say. In fact, threat assessment reports such as the one on black identity extremism pose a particular challenge to local law enforcement, said Mike German, a former FBI agent and vocal critic of the Bureau. What is it telling law enforcement officers to do? German told The Intercept. Most of these assessments just say, be very afraid of this new threat. And they don't give any practical advice for how to identify that threat. Right? There's no guidelines and stipulations. No rules to approach these situations. There's no rules of engagement, right? It just says be very afraid of this new threat. And they don't give any practical advice for how to identify that threat or how to distinguish that threat from legitimate protests or nonviolent civil disobedience or other First Amendment protected activity that might promote some similar ideas but isn't violence, right? So these race soldiers, these devils, they come out and they treat nonviolent protesters who are exercising their rights as criminals and terrorists. See, and that's how revolt and riots kick off, because these individuals don't have the right rules of engagement and they don't have proper handling of the people. Like with the whole Nipsey Hussle situation in Los Angeles. The mayor and the police chief, they know that they don't have the proper rules of engagement. They don't have the proper handling of the people. They don't know how to handle black and brown people, especially when we are going through certain trials and tribulations, such as what happened to Nipsey Hussle. They didn't know how to engage our people. So they asked and begged the Nation of Islam to make sure that that a riot don't break out between the police and the community, the streets. Because they tend to handle the streets rough. They tend to handle our people rough in a disrespectful, condescending manner. And our people are not going to go for that. They don't know how to handle our people. So they beg for us, to maintain the peace. Because we are the peacemakers. Right? This is what we do on a daily basis. We know conflict resolution. Right? So then the solution for these police departments that receive it is to treat all of them as if they're potential threats. Exactly what I was just saying. Treating everybody in the same when there are legitimate people there to practice their rights, exercise their rights. To activists already concerned with police violence and the lack of accountability, police collaboration with the FBI surveillance efforts is particularly troubling. This is happening at the same time when jurisdictions across the country, our police departments are actively acquiring surveillance tools in really secretive ways without any sort of oversight and regulation, said Maisha Hayes, an organizer with Media Justice, in an interview. And it makes me worry that those tools can be used against activists given the sort of environment that the FBI is creating around criminalizing dissent. Right? When you are just trying to practice your rights that you're trying to exercise that's in the Constitution, they're criminalizing you for exercising your rights. So that is hypocrisy. It is backwards. It is a contradiction. To have these rights in the Constitution say that we can do A, and y'all are criminalizing us for doing this. Right? It's a contradiction. Let me continue. We're almost done. Throughout the documents, the FBI repeats boilerplate warnings that some indicators of domestic terrorism may constitute the exercise of rights guaranteed by the First Amendment, and reminds agents that the FBI is prohibited from engaging in investigative activity for the sole purpose of monitoring the exercise of First Amendment rights. Right? Even so, well, let me kind of stop right there right quick. So what that part is saying is that the FBI can't monitor and track people just to see if they are exercising their rights or not. Oh, let me find out, is he really doing what he say he's doing? Just so they can try to incriminate and lock somebody up, right? They can't intrude on our First Amendment rights like that. That's what that's saying. It says, even so, the document suggests that the Bureau did in fact target protected speech as part of its surveillance activities. At some point monitoring the October 2015 Million Man March in Washington, D.C. Listen what it said. Even so, the document suggests that the Bureau did in fact, this is what the document said about the black identity extremists, that the Bureau did in fact target protected speech as part of its surveillance activities, at some point monitoring the October 2015 Million Man March in Washington, D.C. While most of the memo concerning the march is redacted, devils, the document does refer to the violent rhetoric and nature of the event. Right? They let you hear the negative aspect of it, right? Even though the march was in fact a nonviolent demonstration that drew tens of thousands to the Capitol to commemorate the original 1995 event and protest a series of high-profile police killings of black men. While the FBI has a long story of targeting black Americans, most notably when it infiltrated and sought to disrupt the civil rights movement as a part of its COINTELPRO policing campaign. And that's what I was just talking about, the counterintelligence program. This black identity extremist stuff is just a baby of that. It's a child of that, right? The Bureau has in recent years shifted its targets from those espousing separatist views to the much larger group of those protesting police violence. As The Intercept has reported, in an internal email exchange obtained by the government transparency group Property of the People, Michael F. Paul, an official with the FBI's Counterterrorism Division, wrote to colleagues that the Bureau had updated its definition of black separatist extremism in order to broaden it beyond simply those seeking separatism. Paul added, "The threat or movement has simply evolved, and many are seeking more than separation." Right? In fact, what those in that targeted movement say they are seeking is simply an end to police violence, as well as greater justice and government accountability. The Black Lives Matter movement, black-led organizations that are focused around policing and police brutality, have not had a single incident of violence associated with their activist work, Hayes told The Intercept. That tells me that what the FBI is looking for is opportunities to basically disrupt organizing that challenges and threatens the status quo. Right? Wonderful article written by Alice Sperry. Wonderful article. Right? And we understand the FBI's whole motive then in the past with counterintelligence program and now. And that is to disrupt and dismantle black activism and organizations. They want to disrupt and dismantle it. J. Edgar Hoover said that we must prevent the rise of a black messiah who can electrify the people. Who can electrify the people. So, family, we got to be careful on how we move and who we allow into our circles. And we have to be mindful of the things that we say and the things that come out of our mouths, because they will be used against us. Why? Because the enemy is following us and is documenting and reporting everything we say. Government agents and informants. But I'm not going to make this long. I just wanted to read this article and put this thing into perspective. So this is your brother, and I appreciate you. This is your brother, Malcolm Flex TV, and I thank you for watching and tuning in. Assalamu alaikum.